By the time I reached Ridgefield, Oregon, the light had thinned to a pale ribbon across the hills. I had been on the interstate for nearly 10.5 hours, windows cracked just enough to keep me from drifting into that soft, dangerous daze that comes with long roads and old thoughts. On the passenger seat rode a metal tin wrapped in a wool shawl, the lid secured by 2 brass clasps that clicked with every bump as if the past itself had a nervous habit. Inside the tin slept 3 linen route sheets, handed a lifetime ago by my grandfather when he surveyed small freight spurs across the Midwest. Not maps, he hated that word. Path cloths, he called them, because fabric remembers the hand that guides it. My father kept them after the mills shut down, and later they came to me with a whisper and a warning. Protect what isn't replaceable. I had planned to present them to my son tonight, not as a burden, as a beginning. Caleb loved stories when he was small. He'd drag a stool to the kitchen window, and while the kettle trembled, he'd ask again where the tracks curved along the river bend, where the winter wheat once grew, where his great-grandfather tied a red string around a fence post to mark the way home. He'd lay his palm over those cloths and breathe like he could summon the past straight through the linen. I pulled into the cul-de-sac and turned off the engine. The quiet fell fast. Caleb's house looked cut from a magazine. Clean lines, big panes of glass, a porch swing no one had scuffed yet. The sky leaned down, blue-gray and expectant. I lifted the tin, steadying my breath. A woman's laughter carried from inside, bright as corn syrup. I pictured him, my boy in a narrow tie, at ease the way he'd learned to be when he left our old town in Ohio and shed everything that smelled like freight and soot. The door opened before I knocked. Tessa stood there, smooth hair, pearl studs, a cardigan the color of early spring. Her smile stalled when she saw the tin. "Nora!" she said, my name landing lightly on her tongue, like something she wore for politeness. "I brought him a piece of our history," I answered, careful and warm. "For the celebration." Her gaze flicked to the street, then back to my face, as if orchestrating an exit for both of us. "Oh, about that." She shifted the weight of her voice. "We ended up gathering last night. My parents were only in town for the day, and the timing made sense." The tin dug into my forearms. Somewhere behind her a glass chimed against a toast. "I drove from Clearwater," I said, as if distance could argue with a closed calendar. "He told me Saturday." It came together quickly. She softened the edges of her tone, the way you might for a stranger you hope won't take offense. "You know how hectic it has been. We assumed the trip would be hard on you. Hard on me. As if my lungs had aged overnight. As if crossing state lines might shatter my bones." I looked past her shoulder. Warm light, the top of a wine bottle, a man in a blazer I didn't know. Caleb's voice nowhere. "Just a minute," I asked. "I'll slip in, say hello, give him this." She hesitated. The pause stretched like clear thread, pulled between 2 pins. "They're still tidying up," she said finally. "It's not a good time. Another day. Another day." I stepped back before she had to take that step for me. The air outside smelled like damp cedar. The door closed with practiced gentleness. I stood on the porch with the tin pressed to my ribs and realized how light the day had been on warnings. No bad omens. No dropped calls. Sometimes the quiet is the omen. I set the tin on the passenger seat again and waited, hands on the steering wheel, eyes on the small square of yellow window. No shadow moved that looked like my son. No silhouette I could claim as mine. It grew absurd to sit there as if a theater scene would reset and a more welcoming version of the evening would begin. After a while, I turned the key and backed away, the street curving out and then vanishing behind me. I found a roadside lodge off the highway where the hallway smelled faintly of citrus cleaner and old newspapers. In the room, I placed the tin on the bedspread and undid the clasps. The linen sheets unfurled with a soft sound, like a sigh from someone who's been patient too long. Inked lines crossed and parted, annotated with slanted notes my grandfather kept in a compact hand. angles measured from creek to silo, shortcuts over shale, a caution near a washout that had taken a wheel. I traced a route and felt steadier, the way one does when a memory is both a story and a plan. Caleb used to beg to take one of the cloths to school. I'd refuse and distract him with honey on toast, feeling half like a guardian and half like a thief. He'd pout because he believed even then that paths belonged to the next walker, not the keeper. It had been months since we'd spoken properly. Our last call was brisk. He said work was all-consuming, which is a polite way of saying, I'm already somewhere else. There's a peculiar hush that spreads when a door closes without sound. You hear what you never named. You hear what you allowed. I folded the route sheets, then opened the tin's false bottom where I kept a few things that mattered only to those who knew. A small ivory-handled magnifier, a red spool of thread, a cedar chip to keep moths away. Underneath lay a faded envelope I had ignored for weeks. The letterhead belonged to the Heritage Rail Archive in Portland. Their director, a man named Evan Reyes, had written to me every other year since my father passed, asking whether a family would consider entrusting the route cloths to their care. I'd always written back some version of not yet. It had never been the right season. The house in Clearwater felt too empty without the hum of certain keepsakes. But the motel lamp was a harsh, simple light, and under it my reasons looked like decorations I'd forgotten to remove after the holidays. Tessa's tight smile had clipped something inside me, clean through. Not a wall, more like a floor, the kind you land on with both feet and realize you've been hovering for months. I dialed the number at the bottom of the page. Evan answered on the second ring. Warmth baked into his tone like sunlight on old brick. He sounded startled to hear from me, though he did his best not to show it. We had met once years ago at a community lecture where he'd spoken about a vanished rail spur and the worker who mapped it with the precision of prayer. He had a scholar's posture and a field hand's curiosity. We talked then about the faith it takes to draw a line no one else trusts yet. I'm ready, I said now, and while I didn't say what I was ready for, he seemed to understand enough to respond with quiet. If you want to bring them in yourself, he offered, I'll make room this week. We'll treat them as if they carried breath. No one had used the word breath about my family's cloths except me. The way he said it slid a warm ribbon through my cracked composure. We set a time. After I hung up, the motel room looked different, not kinder, clearer. The tin no longer felt like an anchor. It felt like a key. I slept lightly, waking once to the soft rattle of an air vent and again to the steady trickle of vehicles on the road outside. Near dawn, I sat on the edge of the bed and realized the anger I expected hadn't arrived. I thought that meant I was weak. It didn't. It meant something harder had settled, the kind of resolve you don't shout about, the kind that changes what you do with your hands. I drove back to Clearwater the next morning, stopping only for fuel and a paper cup of steaming chamomile from a station where the clerk wore a name tag that read Marty in block letters. The neighborhood near my townhouse was unhurried, winter-brown lawns, a blue bicycle left on its side. Inside, the rooms held their familiar hush. Thomas's photograph, Thomas, my late husband, rested on the sideboard. In certain light his smile made me ache and then steady myself within the same breath. Grief had quieted into a companion who didn't require feeding. That was its grace. I placed the tin on the kitchen table and slid it gently into the top drawer of the old oak buffet, a shallow space where I kept small sacreds, a compass with initials etched faintly on the back, a brass key to a storage trunk long gone, a milk glass button for my mother's wedding dress. The drawer closed with its reassuring click. Oddly, I knew it wouldn't stay there for long. Around midday, I made a pot of mint and sat by the window where winter light lay thin as silk on the sill. And because the day had offered me its first act so cleanly, I waited for the second. When it arrived, it did not announce itself with thunder. It was a memory, modest and firm. The sound of Caleb's voice when he learned he'd been accepted to a university far from home. The tremor of triumph under a layer of apology. He had thanked me then for the years I'd worked double shifts at the clinic. He promised to visit as often as he could. Promises are small ropes. Some hold. Some look strong until you tug. The doorbell didn't ring. My mobile phone didn't hum. Silence fed on silence until it filled the house like fog that knows its way. I opened the buffet drawer again and took out the envelope from the archive, reading Evan's letter with slower care. At the end, he had written in a neat, slanted hand, "If these were mine, I would never push. But I also know certain paths aren't kept by hiding them. They're kept by letting them be seen." The sentence wasn't trying to persuade me. It was simply true. There's a point when sadness stops trembling and becomes structure. I felt that shift while the mint cooled. Not a barricade, a foundation, a place to stand and decide. I reached for a different file, one I hadn't touched in months. On the tab in my own handwriting, I'd once written Household Caleb. It held receipts and informal agreements, the sort of paper trail families think they will never need. 2 contributions I had made when he and Tessa were starting their property venture, another when they fell behind on municipal fees during a renovation. Gifts disguised as loans because I wanted him to learn responsibility without the shame of being rescued. None of it had ever been repaid. I had told myself that wasn't the point. I closed the folder and slid it aside. Through the window, a neighbor's dog ambled along the sidewalk, pausing to examine a stray leaf like it might answer a question. I almost smiled. Then, as if the day had saved one small cruelty for its quiet finale, I noticed a photograph on my corkboard near the pantry. Thanksgiving from the previous year at Caleb and Tessa's place in Santa Rosa. The 3 of us, a well-meaning stranger, snapping the picture in a botanical garden. Their faces were intact. Mine had been trimmed away with a careful hand, the edges smooth, no jagged tear. Someone had cut me out and pinned the remainder back as if that absence were tidier. I took down the photo and pressed it between pages of an old recipe booklet, unsure whether I was preserving goodbye or postponing it. My breath went in and out without my permission. That, too, felt like a decision I hadn't realized I'd made, to keep living even when parts of me had been pared away. By late afternoon, the light thinned again. I wrote an email to Evan confirming the appointment and another, shorter message to Caleb with a line that held neither accusation nor plea. I stopped by. "I have something for you if you want it." No flourish. No thread for argument to catch on. I didn't mention the tin's contents. The cloths had survived wars and winter rot. They would survive a day of uncertainty. I washed my cup, set it to dry, and stood in the stillness that comes right before a person chooses. The house listened. The walls did not lean in or away. The floor under my feet felt honest. I thought I had reached the heaviest part already, the door that didn't open, the tin that grew heavier the longer I held it. I was wrong. The heaviest part was still ahead, and it would not arrive with shouting. It would arrive with paperwork, signatures I did not recognize, and a discovery that would take my breath in a quieter, colder way. But that is another room, just down the corridor of this night. The morning broke in thin silver, threads across the blinds, soft but insistent, the kind of light that doesn't let you hide behind excuses. I had slept, though the sleep felt earned more by exhaustion than by peace. The kettle's slow rumble filled the kitchen, and as steam rose, I remembered what I'd promised Evan. I would bring the tin to the Heritage Rail Archive that afternoon. A simple promise, and yet something beneath that simplicity trembled, like a door slightly ajar in a long hallway. After breakfast, I set the tin on the passenger seat again. It felt lighter, though I knew its weight hadn't changed. Sometimes resolve can trick your hands. I drove north through back roads that curved like rivers around the edges of forgotten farms. The radio murmured static until I turned it off. Silence, I'd learned, was not my enemy. It was a mirror, one that showed only what you refused to say aloud. When I reached the archive, Evan met me outside. He looked exactly as I remembered. Eyes that seemed to study and forgive at once, a slight stoop that made him appear perpetually mid-thought. "You made it," he said, as though my arrival itself was the story. Inside, the air smelled faintly of parchment and old cedar polish. Tables lined with gloves and magnifiers stood like altars to memory. Evan led me to a quiet room with frosted windows. "You can open it yourself," he said, nodding toward the tin. The clasps clicked, and for a heartbeat I thought I heard my father's voice, one of his low, gravelly hums when he concentrated. Evan leaned closer, tracing a fingertip near, but not on, the linen. "These are extraordinary," he whispered. "You've kept them alive." The word alive struck me in a way I hadn't expected. "They kept me alive, too," I answered softly, "through years that didn't know where to go." He smiled at that, genuine, not practiced. "Would you be open to recording an oral history? Something for the interns to learn from?" I hesitated. Speaking aloud about my family's legacy felt like stepping barefoot onto cold stone. But then again, what was the point of keeping something alive if you refused to let it breathe? "I can do that," I said. "Maybe next week." He nodded, and for a while we worked in silence. Watching him handle the cloths with reverence did something to me. It felt like witnessing someone treat my life as if it had weight again. By the time I left, the afternoon had turned the color of soft brass. I drove home with the kind of tiredness that comes after doing something irreversible, but right. My chest felt open, not empty. Yet, as I pulled into my driveway, I noticed an envelope wedged in the front door frame, pale against the dark wood. No return address. My name written in Caleb's handwriting, familiar, rushed, careless. Inside was a wedding invitation. White, expensive paper, gold edges, embossed lettering. Caleb Everett and Tessa Vaughn, the print read. Ceremony in Portland. No mention of a reception. At the bottom, in small serif font, it said, "Ceremony only. No guests beyond immediate family." Immediate family. I stood in the doorway for a long time, letting that phrase do its work. Clean, clinical, final. There was no note, not even a signature. Just formality where warmth used to live. The anger came this time, not loud but precise. I carried the invitation into my study, opened the desk drawer, and pulled out the folder I had looked at the night before, the one labeled Household Caleb. My pulse found a rhythm as I laid the papers out. Transfers, banknotes, checks marked loan, each written in my own hand years earlier. Every figure I'd chosen to forget because forgetting seemed kinder. Something in me began organizing without permission, an instinct older than forgiveness. I divided the papers into piles, straightened the edges, slipped them into clear sleeves. It wasn't vengeance. It was inventory, proof that I had existed in more than memory. The afternoon light slid lower. I brewed another pot of tea, chamomile this time, and watched the tiny flecks swirl in the cup like dust in water. That's when I remembered the safe in the utility closet, the one Thomas and I bought after his second heart surgery, back when we still thought security came in metal boxes. It had been years since I opened it. My hands found the code easily, muscle memory outlasting everything else. Inside were manila folders, neatly labeled. Insurance, estate, Catskill property. The last one caught my eye. The Catskill house. A small cabin Thomas and I bought decades ago after my mother passed. A sanctuary by a lake that changed color with the sky. It had been ours, bought in cash with my inheritance. I hadn't visited since Thomas died. But as I opened the folder, a chill rippled through me. On the last page, stapled to the original deed, was a new document, a title transfer. The signature line, my name, looked right, but the pen stroke wasn't mine. And the date? Less than a year old. Beneath the printed header were the words, Evervaughn Holdings, LLC. My breath caught. The registered agents, Caleb Everett and Tessa Vaughn. For a long moment, I couldn't make sense of it. Then, piece by piece, the silence rearranged itself into clarity. They had moved the property, without my consent, without even telling me. The air thickened, my pulse in my ears. It wasn't the betrayal that stunned me. It was the calculation. I carried the folder to the table, set it under the lamplight, and stared until the letters blurred. My mind kept repeating the same phrase. They wouldn't. They couldn't. But the evidence sat right there, legal, notarized, cruelly professional. When the shaking in my hand stopped, I took a deep breath and dialed a number I hadn't used in years. Meredith Connolly. Her mother, June, had been Thomas's attorney. Meredith had taken over the practice after her mother passed. She answered on the third ring, calm, composed, as if expecting bad news from strangers was part of her profession. "Nora," she said, "it's been a long time." "Too long," I replied. My voice surprised me, steady, almost detached. "I need to ask you about something I think I should have noticed sooner." I told her everything, from the unopened door at Caleb's house to the false signature on the deed. She didn't interrupt. When I finished, she asked me to bring the papers in the next morning. That night, I packed the folder into my briefcase along with the loan records, the old letters, and Thomas's note about the property. Then I sat at the table, the invitation beside my teacup, and whispered into the quiet, "You were right, Thomas. I should have kept my name where it belonged." Sleep came late, shallow, edged with flashes of memory. Caleb laughing at 8, tracing routes with chocolate-stained fingers. Thomas sanding the cabin's porch rails in early autumn. My own voice, promising to protect what mattered. Promises are simple until they're tested. By dawn, I had made up my mind. I would drive to Meredith's office. I would not call Caleb. Not yet. This was not about confrontation. It was about truth, cold, written, undeniable truth. As the sun broke over the lake, light spilled across the kitchen floor like water. I looked down at it, calm and clear, and whispered, "It's time." Meredith's office sat above a florist on the quiet end of Main Street, where the smell of lilies drifted up through the floorboards. The sign on the glass door read Connolly and Hartman, attorneys at law, though I knew the Hartman had retired years ago. When I stepped inside, the air was cool, still, and smelled faintly of lemon oil and old paper, the kind of room where truths were meant to be said slowly without breaking. The receptionist smiled politely and gestured toward a leather chair. Minutes later, Meredith appeared in the doorway. Her hair was shorter than I remembered, streaked with silver that suited her face. She greeted me not with surprise, but with quiet understanding, as though she already knew what kind of story I had come to tell. "Come in, Nora," she said. "Let's take a look." In her office, sunlight slanted through the blinds, striping the desk in alternating bars of gold and shadow. I laid the folder on the table and slid it toward her. She put on her glasses and began to read. The room filled with the soft shuffle of pages turning, paper against paper, the sound of an old life being examined. After several minutes, she stopped. "You're right," she said, her tone careful, measured. "That isn't your signature. The stroke pressure, the angle, they're wrong. Whoever signed this did a convincing imitation, but not enough to fool the law." I stared at the papers as though they belonged to someone else. They moved the deed into an LLC, Evervaughn Holdings. My son and his fiancée. She nodded. "I've seen this pattern before. It's called a fraudulent conveyance, using forged documents to transfer assets from one person to another without informed consent. If we can prove it, you have a strong case." A case. The word felt both heavy and hollow. I hadn't come for vengeance. I'd come for understanding. But Meredith's tone left no room for doubt. This wasn't a misunderstanding. It was deliberate. "What do I do?" I asked quietly. "You don't contact them," she said firmly. "Not yet. We'll trace the LLC's formation, find who notarized the papers, and check whether any power of attorney was filed without your knowledge. Until we know more, keep everything safe." Safe. I almost laughed at the irony. Safety had become a myth in my own house. I left with her card and a new kind of silence, the kind that doesn't ache but hums ready. Back home, I locked every document into my briefcase, then set it in the trunk of my car. I didn't trust the walls anymore. That night, I called my accountant, my insurance agent, even the bank manager I hadn't spoken to in years. Each conversation added another thread to the web I hadn't known existed. Someone had changed my mailing address for property tax notices. Someone had accessed joint insurance policies under my name. Quiet moves, careful hands, familiar handwriting. By midnight, I sat at the kitchen table, surrounded by the soft chaos of truth. It was almost elegant, the way deception hides in routine, the way love blinds you to forgery because the liar shares your blood. The next morning, Meredith called. Her voice was calm but different, sharper at the edges. "I found something," she said. "Evervon Holdings was formed 5 months before you visited them. Registered agent, a business associate of Caleb's. And the cabin, it's already been used as collateral on a short-term loan for a restaurant project." My grip on the phone tightened. "Collateral," I repeated, the syllables foreign in my mouth. "They borrowed against your property," she said quietly. "It's risky. If the business fails, the lender can seize the cabin." For a long moment, I didn't speak. My heartbeat was slow but forceful, like distant thunder. "Can we stop it?" "Yes," she replied, "but we have to move fast. I'll file a petition to challenge the transfer and freeze the property's legal status until a full investigation." "Do it," I said. After we hung up, I sat perfectly still. Then I stood, walked to the cabinet, and took down a photograph. Caleb at 12, standing beside Thomas at the lake, both of them laughing. I touched the glass, tracing the curve of my son's smile. The boy I had raised with bedtime stories and patched jeans had become a man who could forge his mother's name. But grief, I realize, is not just sadness. It's recognition. That evening, when Caleb and Tessa came home, I was waiting in the kitchen. The box of family photos sat on the counter. Their voices echoed through the hallway. Laughter first, then the kind of tension that follows when laughter runs out. Tessa noticed me first. "Oh, Nora," she said lightly. "We didn't know you were here." "I live here," I said simply. Her smile faltered. Caleb stepped in behind her, sleeves rolled up, face pale. "Mom, we were going to talk to you about—" I lifted my hand, stopping him. "No," I said. "Not yet. I know about the cabin, the LLC, the forged signature." Silence landed between us like a dropped plate that somehow didn't break. Tessa's lips parted, but no sound came out. Caleb's eyes flicked to hers, then back to me. "Mom, it's complicated." "It's theft," I said softly. "Not complicated." His face flushed. "You don't understand what it's like trying to build something." "I built something," I interrupted. "With your father. With my hands. And you dismantled it with a pen." The quiet that followed was absolute. For a moment, even the house seemed to hold its breath. "I'm leaving for a few days," I said finally. "I need space." Tessa exhaled, almost relieved. "That's probably best." Caleb's shoulders sagged. "Please don't do anything rash," he said. "This can still work out." "I agree," I replied. "It will work out for the truth." I packed that night. Just a small suitcase, the briefcase of documents, and a letter Thomas had written to me the year before he died. At dawn, I drove north, toward the Catskills. The road wound through pine forests and fog. With every mile, the air thinned, the noise fell away, and I began to remember who I had been before motherhood became martyrdom. When I reached the cabin, the world was gray and still. Dust greeted me like an old friend. I opened the windows, built a fire, and let the warmth settle into the wood. For the first time in months, I breathed without effort. That night, I wrote a letter to Meredith. File everything. Don't stop until it's undone. I sealed it, left it in the mailbox, and felt something shift inside me. Not anger, not revenge, but the beginning of reclamation. Outside, the lake reflected a thin slice of moon. I whispered into the cold, "You taught me maps, Caleb, but you forgot who drew them first." And for the first time in years, the silence answered back. When I returned from the cabin 3 days later, the air in Clearwater carried the heavy sweetness of rain about to fall. The house looked unchanged from the outside, paint unchipped, windows clear. But when I stepped through the door, the quiet felt different. Thinner, as though the walls were holding their breath, waiting to see who I was now. Tessa stood at the kitchen counter, slicing lemons into a glass pitcher. She didn't look up when she spoke. "We didn't expect you back so soon." "I didn't expect to leave at all," I said. My voice sounded even, maybe too even. Caleb appeared in the doorway behind her. His expression was cautious, like someone approaching a wild animal that used to be a pet. "Mom," he began, "I was going to call you. There's been a misunderstanding." "There's been a crime," I interrupted. "The county recorder's office received my petition yesterday morning. The property transfer is under review." Tessa's knife, still mid-slice. Caleb's face drained of color. "What petition?" he asked, though his voice already knew the answer. I set my briefcase on the table and opened it. The letter from Meredith lay on top, crisp and unmistakable. I slid it toward him. "This one." He read the first few lines before lowering the page. "Mom, please," he said quietly. "It wasn't meant to hurt you. We thought the cabin could help us fund something bigger, something for the family's future." "The family's future," I repeated, tasting the phrase like it was metal on my tongue. "You mean your business." Tessa crossed her arms, chin lifting. "You've never understood how much pressure he's under. We didn't take anything from you. It was still going to stay in the family." "That's what thieves always say," I replied. The room grew still again, except for the faint hum of the refrigerator. Caleb took a slow breath. "We can fix this," he said. "You don't have to make it public." "It already is," I said. "That's what happens when people file fraudulent deeds." He looked at me for a long time, something flickering behind his eyes that wasn't quite guilt and not quite regret, something closer to recognition. 60 days, I said finally. "You'll need to move out by then." Tessa's mouth fell open. "You're evicting us?" "I'm reclaiming what's mine," I said. "You've both made it clear this house is no longer a home. It's a transaction." Caleb stepped forward, his hands trembling. "Mom, please don't do this." "I already have," I said. He didn't argue. Instead, he looked down at the table, at the lemon slices, at anything but me. The sound of rain began tapping softly against the windows, as though the world was adding punctuation to our silence. That night, I sat on the porch alone. The air smelled of wet earth and electricity. Inside, I heard drawers opening and closing, boxes shifting. They were already preparing. The thought should have hurt, but instead it steadied me. Meredith called the next morning. "The court accepted our motion," she said. "You've regained temporary control of the cabin pending investigation. It's officially frozen. They can't sell it or use it as collateral anymore." For the first time in months, I exhaled without feeling like the air was borrowed. I spent the next few weeks living like a witness in my own house. Tessa avoided me completely. Her laughter, once sharp and constant, vanished. Caleb tried to maintain civility, asking polite questions about the mail, the garden, the weather. Small talk designed to keep the peace. But peace built on avoidance isn't peace at all. It's theater. One morning, a courier arrived with an envelope addressed to me. County seal. Inside was confirmation of the property dispute, black ink, official tone. The kind of letter that doesn't need to raise its voice to change a life. I read it at the kitchen table while Tessa brewed coffee. She glanced at the paper, curiosity flickering across her face. "What's that?" she asked. "Resolution," I said. When Caleb came downstairs minutes later, she handed him the letter before I could fold it away. He scanned it once, then twice, his jaw tightening. "You really went through with it?" "I did," I said. He leaned against the counter, staring at the floor. "You're destroying this family over a piece of land." "No," I said softly. "I'm saving what's left of it from what you've already destroyed." He didn't answer. The truth has a way of sitting in a room like a storm you can't leave. That evening they asked to talk. We sat in the living room, Caleb on the edge of his seat, Tessa poised beside him, eyes sharp. He started first. We never meant for things to go this far. The business is struggling, but it was supposed to help everyone. We just needed a foundation. You forged mine, I said. He swallowed hard. It was Tessa's idea to use the LLC, but I signed off. I thought I could manage it better than you could. The taxes, the upkeep, everything. Tessa looked at him sharply, but said nothing. I nodded slowly. Then you should have asked. He opened his mouth, closed it again. I stood and walked to the mantel. There, among framed photos, was one from Thanksgiving a decade ago. Caleb had his arm around me, smiling. Thomas was alive, laughing. I picked it up and handed it to my son. This is what I thought we were protecting, I said. He stared at the photo, eyes wet, but he didn't look up. When I finally spoke again, my voice felt like something newly sharpened. Your access to my accounts ends tomorrow. I've rewritten every document, trusts, wills, medical directives. You and Tessa are no longer listed anywhere. Tessa inhaled sharply, a small gasp. Caleb flinched, but didn't protest. I'm not doing this to punish you, I continued. I'm doing it to protect myself. I won't apologize for that. I set the photo back on the mantel and walked toward the door. Dinner was lovely, I said, though none of us had eaten. No one followed me as I left the room. That night, for the first time in years, I slept without dreaming of rescue. The rain had stopped. The silence that filled the house wasn't hollow anymore. It was mine. 2 weeks after Caleb and Tessa left, the house began to sound different. Not quieter, truer. The walls, once tense with other people's voices, now breathed in rhythm with mine. I had space again, not the hollow kind that echoes, but the kind that listens. I started with small rituals. Morning coffee brewed slow and dark, not the rushed half-cups I used to make when I was waiting for someone else to arrive. I opened windows that hadn't been touched in months, letting the air move through like a cleansing wind. I pulled boxes from the attic, old photos, unfinished letters, scraps of the life I'd paused. Some memories hurt. Some healed. Most just existed, patient and unashamed. But peace, I learned, rarely lasts long without purpose. The knock came on a Thursday. When I opened the door, I saw a woman I hadn't spoken to in years. Gwen, Thomas's cousin. Her hair was streaked with silver now, her posture small but steady. She held an envelope between her hands. I won't stay, she said. But Harold, Thomas, gave me this before he passed. He said I'd know when you needed it. I took the envelope, confused. He never mentioned anything. He said you would find out when the time was right, she replied. Her eyes softened. Maybe this is that time. After she left, I sat at the kitchen table staring at the envelope. The handwriting on the front was unmistakably Thomas's, his slow, deliberate print. My chest tightened as I slid a finger under the seal. Inside was a letter. If you're reading this, it means the storm finally reached the house. I wish I could have stood beside you through it, but maybe that's the point. You were always the strong one. I moved the cabin into your name 2 months before I passed. Quietly, legally. No one else knows. If anyone tries to touch it, they're reaching for something that isn't theirs. Remember, love can cloud reason, but it never erases truth. Protect what we built, and when you're ready, build something new from it. I read it twice, then a third time. My hands trembled, but not from fear. Relief, thick, solid relief, poured through me. Thomas had seen what I hadn't dared to name. He had left me armor long before I knew I'd need it. The next morning, I called Meredith. I have something, I said. My voice steadied as I scanned and sent the letter. By afternoon, she called back. Nora, this changes everything. The second trust is valid and recorded. The LLC's sale of the property has no standing. They never owned it. You're the sole legal owner. I sat down slowly, letting the truth settle like sunlight on stone. The land was mine. not because of signatures or courts, but because someone I loved had believed I would fight for it. For a moment, I felt triumph. Then, unexpectedly, sorrow. The kind that comes when victory arrives too late to share. That evening, I drove to the cabin. The forest was painted in early autumn colors, gold and russet spilling across the hills. Inside, the air smelled faintly of pine and dust. I built a fire and sat on the porch, Thomas's letter in my lap. The sky above was clear, 1,000 stars unbothered by the noise of human betrayal. The silence here wasn't empty, it was sacred. I realized then that everything I'd fought for had never been about the property. It was about dignity, about naming what was taken and choosing not to disappear quietly. When I returned to Clearwater, I didn't go back to the same life. The house was intact, but I was not the same woman who'd left it. Something in me had shifted, not hardened, rooted. I began spending mornings at the public library, not in the fiction aisles where I once hid from the world, but downstairs in the community room. Flyers for city meetings and charity drives covered the bulletin board. On one corner hung a notice for Women's Legal Resource Nights. The words stirred something inside me. That night, I opened a blank notebook and began outlining an idea. Small, simple, but insistent. A foundation, not for revenge. For women like me, those who had trusted too long, given too freely, been erased too quietly. Women whose worth had been rewritten by the people they raised. I called it the Lena Foundation, after my grandmother, a woman who survived war, widowhood, and still found time to laugh like thunder. Meredith helped me with the legal paperwork. She introduced me to June, a retired accountant who had once been pushed out of her own firm by her sons, and Ellie, real estate agent who had lost her house to forged signatures. Together, we rented a small space near the bus station. Bare walls, second-hand desks, a coffee maker that hissed like an old friend. It was enough. At first, only a handful of women came. They were cautious, like birds testing the air. But one by one, they spoke. Some had lost homes. Some had lost families. All had lost their voices. We shared stories, half whispers, half confessions, and something miraculous began to take shape in that small room. Not just hope, but proof. Proof that silence, once broken, can echo into something larger than survival. A few months later, a local reporter attended one of our meetings. The article she wrote didn't name us individually, but her words carried weight. A quiet revolution grows in Clearwater, led by women who refuse to vanish from their own stories. Within weeks, letters began arriving. Folded notes slipped under our door. Handwritten confessions from women who had been tricked, silenced, sidelined. One simply read, "I gave everything, and now they say I imagined it. Please tell me I still exist." I pinned that note to the corkboard. It became our first rule: no one disappears here. By the end of winter, the Lena Foundation had become more than a project. It was a heartbeat. The article spread faster than I imagined. Within a week, the Lena Foundation's phone rang so often that we had to take shifts answering it. Retired nurses, teachers, secretaries, widows, they came in pairs, in silence and hope. Some just wanted to sit in a room where no one talked over them. Others brought folders of papers they couldn't bear to open alone. The building smelled faintly of lavender from the muffins Judith, one of our regulars, baked every Saturday. She said baking kept her hands from trembling when she spoke. I understood. We all needed something to hold on to when the truth began to surface. We were still arranging chairs one morning when a man from the Clearwater Daily Chronicle arrived. He said the foundation had become a local phenomenon and asked if he could write a profile. I hesitated, wary of how easily attention could turn into spectacle. But he promised it would be honest, human. I agreed, not for myself, but for the women whose stories deserved air. The article ran under the title Lena's Daughters, Rebuilding What Was Never Broken. It was quiet and powerful. He wrote about the workshops, the shared laughter, the rebuilding of confidence that had nothing to do with money and everything to do with belonging. 2 days later, I got a call from the regional PBS affiliate. The producer, a woman named Michelle Everett, had read the story and invited me to speak at their annual Women's Legacy Night. I almost said no. I wasn't used to microphones or spotlights. My work had always been quiet, stitched together by teacups, late nights, and slow trust. But Meredith smiled when I told her. "You don't need to be comfortable," she said. "You just need to be truthful." So I said yes. The event was held in the old Grandview Theater downtown, the same place where Thomas once took me to see black and white films when we were young and still building dreams out of small things. The stage lights were warm and blinding. My hands trembled once, then steadied as I looked out into the dark audience. I spoke without notes, without rehearsal. I told them about the cabin, about the map cloths, about the silence that once swallowed my home hole. I told them about the price of love when it's mistaken for permission, and about how forgiveness can't be forced into being. It has to grow in the space you reclaim for yourself. Mostly, though, I spoke about the women who had come after me, the ones who sat in that tiny office and dared to believe they were still real. When I finished, there was a heartbeat of stillness before the applause came. It wasn't loud. It was steady, like rain after a long drought. Later, when I walked backstage, Meredith was waiting with tears in her eyes. That, she said quietly, was justice. A week later, a letter arrived at the foundation. The handwriting stopped me before I even opened it. "Caleb." Inside was a short note, cold and formal. He said he had seen the broadcast, that he hoped I would avoid using family matters for public content, and that he might pursue legal steps if the representation continued. I read it twice, folded it once, and placed it in the bottom drawer of my desk. I didn't feel anger, not even sadness. I felt distance, the kind that means you finally stepped off the stage someone else built for you. That same afternoon, Judith arrived early with another batch of lavender muffins. She placed them on the table and said softly, "I saw you on TV." Her eyes shimmered. For the first time in years, I believed I still mattered. I reached across the table and took her hand. "You always did," I said. That night, after locking up the foundation, I took the long route home. I passed the old law office, Meredith's light still burning behind frosted glass, and the diner where I'd once sat alone, wondering what would come next. The streets were quiet, empty, silvered by the glow of street lamps. When I reached home, I didn't turn on any lights. I went straight to the porch, wrapped myself in Thomas's old cardigan, and listened to the world breathe. The sound of the wind moving through the trees, the distant hum of a train, the rhythm of something steady and sure. It struck me then that the real inheritance wasn't the land or the maps or even the justice I'd fought for. It was the silence, not the one that isolates, but the one that shelters. Legacy, I realized, isn't what you leave behind. It's what you build in others while you're still here. A few weeks later, I saw Caleb at the grocery store. He looked thinner, older somehow. Our eyes met across the parking lot. I gave him a small nod. He nodded back. No words, no apologies, just space, clean, necessary space. Sometimes silence is the kindest ending. That weekend, I visited Thomas's grave for the first time in months. I brought a sunflower from the foundation garden, bright, unapologetic yellow, and placed it in the grass. The air smelled of rain and new beginnings. "I did it," I whispered. "Not for revenge, for peace." Then I stood there, eyes closed, until the ache softened into something gentler, not grief, not triumph, just stillness. When I went home, the house greeted me like an old friend. I brewed tea, opened the window, and let the wind move through freely. For the first time in years, I felt completely at ease, not waiting, not remembering, not hoping, just existing. And that, I thought, was the truest kind of victory.